Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Manzoor Ahmed. I'm associated with PRIED as a researcher. So I'll be moderating today's webinar where we are going to talk about finance and the role of banks in meeting Pakistan's energy transition targets. To set a little bit of context, Pakistan falls among the top 10 countries which are vulnerable to climate change. And in parallel, uh, we also face a lot of inefficiencies in our energy sector, um, which then translates into higher energy prices, as well as import reliance and balance of payment crisis. Transitioning to renewable energy for us is increasingly a question of rescuing our financial and environmentally unsustainable energy sector. Based on the context, the government of Pakistan understands the situation well and have set ambitious targets to renewable energy. So, as per our NDC's goals, Pakistan aimed to shift 60% of its energy requirements to renewable energy and having 30% of EVs on the road by 2030. Premise on that, finance is going to play an important role in meeting these targets and leveraging our energy transition momentum. Although the government of Pakistan and central bank have taken initiatives to ensure capital allocation for clean energy scale up, yet there is posed uh, logic at work in the design uh, uh, of clean financing schemes, complexities behind obtaining funds, perceived and real barriers of green lending. So these factors have been overlooked in the policy circles. Therefore, the dynamics of the effectiveness of green lending policies and its impacts is poorly understood. So this necessitates the need to analyze the current financing landscape of energy transition and prevailing challenges that are hindering the finance transition. In light of this, PRIDE, in collaboration with Agora, carried out this extensive research analyzing the financing landscape of two products, EVs and distributed solar. We'll share the findings of our study in a while. Also, it is important to note that in this study, we only look at the personal loans of these two technologies. Some details about our timeline. We kickstarted this project in May last year. Also, the initial findings were disseminated during a workshop in December to various stakeholders. The insights gained from this workshop have further incorporated into our findings. Let me just quickly run through the agenda of the day. We will have two sessions today. In the first session, we'll start the webinar with our study presentation. The presentation will be followed by a 10 minutes Q&A. So kindly do drop your question in the chat box as we progress with the presentation. And in the second session, we'll have a panel discussion. I'll introduce our panelists in the follow-up session. So without wasting any time, let me hand over to Rimsha and Naila to present the study findings. Rimsha Rehan, who is an IMF Youth Fellow and is currently working as a research associate at PRIDE, where her research is focused on climate finance and sustainable development goals. Naila is a project manager at Agora, where she looks at the Pakistan program, and she's also a guest researcher at Technical University Berlin, where her research is concentrated on socioeconomic, technical transition and decentralized energy transition initiatives. So over to you, Rimsha.
Hello, everyone. It's really nice to meet you all. I'll start with the presentation of our study, and I'm just going to share my screen for that. Okay, so I hope my screen is visible to you all. Manzoor, can you let me know?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's
perfect.
visible. Thank you.
Okay, so our study mainly focused on facilitating green loans for sustainable energy transition And as explained earlier, we're looking at the case of distributed solar and electric vehicle lending in Pakistan. So just starting, I'll give you a brief overview of our presentation. We'll first see the solar and the EV lending landscape in Pakistan, and then we'll quickly move on to the objectives of our study as well as the methodology that we follow to assess the green lending challenges, and followed by the thematic analysis that basically explains the major challenges that are prevalent in the existing ecosystem of green lending space, and finally the recommendations and conclusion. To give an introduction, an overview of the current landscape, we know that renewable energy it holds the key to a sustainable future. And the recent advancements have significantly improved the feasibility of renewable energy resources, which is due to the declining cost and increase in the quality of these products. However, a major challenge that is associated with these technologies is their capital intensity. Even though they're cost competitive over their life cycle, we know that they require a substantial upfront investment. And this is why access to financing is one of the major problems due to which the penetration of solar as well as EV is very low in the market. And especially in the case of developing countries where high purchase cost acts as a major impediment. So in order to overcome this cost barrier, financial institutes as well as commercial banks have a critical role to play in the energy transition process because they not only provide access to green financing, but they also deliver credit to the end users. And we see several countries that governments have provided these financial incentives in form of purchase subsidies to prospective buyers to bring down the cost of these technologies to a comparable level as to conventional products. So here a pressing question that exists is that how do we facilitate the flow of finance to achieve our energy transition targets? We know that green lending or green loans is critical for our energy transition mechanism, but we still see that majority of the banks shy away from providing financing for these products. Now, this is due to a number of factors, including the newness of the technology itself or the high risk associated with it, and as well as long payback periods. And in this case, central banks play an important role as the guardians of the financial system because they not only set the financial sector goals to build resilience, but they also address the cause and effect of climate change and its effect in the economies itself. And globally, we do see a surge in the green lending facilities presently in many of our peer regional countries that we also analyzed in our study, such as China, Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and even Norway. Their central banks have introduced specific policy interventions for green financing. And in Pakistan, we also see some very exceptional initiatives that was taken by the central bank. So the Central Bank of Pakistan, which is State Bank of Pakistan, introduced a concessionary financing scheme in 2016, which is known as the SBP financing scheme for renewable energy, in order to promote renewable energy transition, which was targeted to both large and small scale renewable energy solutions. And similarly, for the EVs in 2023, another concessional financing scheme was approved specifically for two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And we look at the details of these facilities ahead. So starting off with the first financing facility that was approved in 2016 and was implemented as well, we see that this scheme was basically a refinance facility. So in a refinance facility, the central government basically provides liquidity to commercial banks, and the commercial banks then channels this liquidity to the prospective borrowers. And it is important to see that this scheme was mainly covering the power generation renewable energy, including solar and wind technology. And it extends financial support to various categories of investors and borrowers. So if we see in category one, this was targeted mainly towards large scale investors, whereas category two was mainly targeted towards small scale investors and borrowers, including consumers and end users in even small SMEs. And the third category was targeted for the vendors or suppliers who wanted to install RE on a lease or rental basis. And we see that this scheme was basically concessionary. What means is that the primary objective of this refinance facility was not only to just divert the capital flow towards renewable energy, but also do that in a very equitable and affordable manner in order to ensure a broader energy transition. And we see that our study mainly focused on category two since it was targeted towards end users. And we see the features of this scheme were very attractive. So the interest rate was fixed and quite low as compared to market at only 6%, whereas the tenor was around 10 years. And it also offered 100% of total financing, which means that it did not require any down payments as well. So it's also important to mention that this scheme is voluntary. So this means that only the interested commercial banks or the financial institutes would be able to utilize it. So the process worked in a way that an interested bank would then send out an application to the State Bank of Pakistan, and then the application would be approved and the funds would be allotted for the specific bank. So it was up to the banks to decide if they want to adopt, if they want to extend lending under this scheme or not. And they also had the autonomy of designing their own features, as the scheme only states the maximum and minimum criteria, but the banks can set their own the terms and conditions as per given in the range. Now moving forward, for the electric vehicles, we see that in 2019, EV policy came out in which the Ministry of Climate Change said that it wanted to achieve 50% of all the sales of two-wheelers and three-wheelers to be electric by 2030. And in regards to that, last year in 2023, the Coordination Committee also approved of a scheme under the Prime Minister's Youth Business and Agriculture Loan Scheme, which was mainly targeted towards e-bikes and e-rickshaws for two-wheelers and three-wheelers. And this scheme was actually based on different subsidy models, which we are going to see ahead. This scheme had different sort of models on which the consumers can opt for purchasing an EV bike or an EV three-wheeler. So if we see here, we see a cash purchase model in which the government had decided to provide a lump sum amount, a provide amount of PKR 100,000 through banks as processing agents, whereas the remaining lump sum amount would be shared with the consumers from their own sources. Similarly, in the price sharing model, we see that it was divided also in the form of lump sum as well as on the bank. So the government was providing the first PKR 100,000 on sharing basis, and the remaining 70,000 PKR was given as a loan for 2 years. And the 50% credit guarantee was given by the government to the banks. And similar a model was shared in the easy loan model as well, in which 30% down payment was to be done by the consumer and the remaining amount was to be financed between the government and the bank itself. So these were the two schemes that we analyzed in our study. Now, moving ahead with the objectives of our study and the methodological framework, our objectives were pretty much straightforward and clear. First, we wanted to see the and improve the understanding of green lending landscape in Pakistan, which is rather a relatively less talked topic in the current literature. And secondly, we wanted to identify what are the major impediments or the challenges that are being faced in the specifically towards solar and EV projects under the different schemes that were available. And lastly, we wanted to see how do we solve or overcome these barriers in order to improve the access to finance and steer the capacity of green loans investment in a more equitable and a more ecologically balanced direction. So these were the three main objectives of our study. Now moving ahead with the methodology that we followed. So we mainly had a mixed method approach in which the research design included both document analysis as well as interviews with the key stakeholders. So in the first stage, we did a thorough literature review of the current financing landscape of the green lending facilities or the landscape that was available in Pakistan. And this also included the scoping of different banks that are currently engaged in EV or solar financing. So as you can see, we divided these financial institutes into two groups. Group A was the one who was extending loans, and Group B are the institutes who are not extending any type of loans for green products. So amongst this, the group A, we further scoped it out and analyzed that what are the terms and conditions or the features of the financing that they are extending to the borrowers. And then in the second stage, we moved on towards semi-structured interviews, where we carried out with different energy experts, including government and non-government, public and private sector both. And we wanted to see how the financial actors who play an important role in order to in order to channel these loans, what challenges or the inertia that is being faced in this space that is contributing towards a restricted lending behavior. And our semi-structured questionnaire looked at various questions, for example, how renewable financing schemes actually play on ground, and why our majority of banks have distanced themselves from these schemes. What are the complexities or the bureaucratic hurdles in assessing these loans by the potential adopters? And then also, what are the perceived apprehensions that is contributing to this lending behavior? And finally, what recommendations or what solutions do the interviewers provide in order to solve these effectively? So just to give an overview of the stakeholders that we interviewed, it included almost 11 from the financial institutes, including Bank Al-Falah, Mizan Bank. These are the major banks of Pakistan. Then we also interviewed government institute, including Ministry of Climate Change, Ministry of Industries, Ministry of NECA, which is National Energy Conservation Authority. We also interviewed some of the civil society organizations, including UNIDO, STPI, Indus Consortium, and from academia, that included LUMS Energy Institute as well as NED. And we also looked at the private sector side, which was the current suppliers of EV, for example, Vlectra, and for solar, it was Shams Power. So now moving ahead, I would request my colleague Naila to continue on with the thematic analysis that will explain the challenges or the study findings that we analyzed. Uh, Naila, over to you. Thank
Thank you,
you.
Rimsha. So now in this part, we will look at where we stand when it comes to the progression and implementation of the financing facilities that Rimsha just presented. And also we will look at the broader challenges in the green lending space. Yeah. So yeah, this is, in this slide, you can see that distributed solar PV and electric vehicle lending in Pakistan is still in its infancy. As you can see from the graph, only 41% of the banks have been so far extending loans for distributed solar PV projects. And in the case of the state bank renewable energy financing scheme, not all banks have chosen to embrace the facility and extend finance under it. In contrast, only 4% of the banks are presently extending finance for EVs, and that too under conventional loans. So although a financing scheme for electric two-wheeler and three-wheelers based on subsidy models has been introduced, but this scheme has not yet been put into effect. Yeah, next slide, please. So yeah, Rimsha, can you move to the next slide?
It's just lagging a bit. I've actually moved it.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, we can see it now. So yeah, so it is evident that most banks are not keen on engaging in green lending, and we also conducted interviews with banks to explore their opinion about renewable energy financing. And this graph basically shows the concerns of majority banks with regard to EVs and distributed solar PV. And these apprehensions largely stem from concerns about default risks, which are rooted in absence of risk sharing mechanisms and absence of secondary markets for resale value. Further, since the loans under the state bank facility are offered at very low interest rates, so this further decreases the interest of banks due to the low returns. And according to majority banks, when compared to the administrative burden of processing these loans, the returns are very low, which affects their net benefit. So these concerns within the financial institutions act as a significant barrier, limiting the widespread adoption of these financing facilities. Yeah, if we can move to the next slide. And these concerns with regard to perceived risks has then compelled the financial institutions to reassess their uh, risk assessment processes, collateral valuation methods, which then creates difficulties in accessing these loans. And if you recall, a crucial aspect of the state bank scheme for renewable energy, aside from its uh, below market interest rate, was its favorable financing conditions. This included the option to offer 100% financing without a down payment, as well as flexible loan terms extending up to 10 years. Uh, but apart from the interest rate, banks have the autonomy to determine the other financing features as they deem appropriate and whatever fits their interest. And this is why the features of renewable energy financing vary from one bank to another. And we collated and categorized this information to gain insight into the individual bank requirements for accessing financing as illustrated in these graphs. So yeah, our analysis indicates that majority banks in Pakistan offer financing for solar PV and secured by assets or collateral, with most requiring down payments from borrowers. And there is a variability in loan tenors among banks, with some offering shorter terms. Um, also, so altogether, these conditions in turn create difficulties in access finance and restrict the scope of these facilities to a smaller section of the population, undermining equitable distribution of these concessional facilities. And if we could move to the next slide. And then critical limitations within the regulations have been another key constraint. We know that Central Bank of Pakistan introduced this concessionary financing scheme with good intentions to support renewable energy uptake. But as we have shown in our findings that majority banks distance themselves from this lending facility, the voluntary regulations for the implementation of the scheme have been a key factor in its partial introduction. And this is why renewable energy lending continues to be in its infancy. Further, the scheme also has limited scope. It targets mainly solar and wind technology. EVs and other energy efficient appliances do not fall under its scope. And so in the case of EVs, there was a recognized need then to introduce another financing facility, which so far has not been implemented. So the taxonomy related problems in terms of narrow scope of these facilities, as well as the need to introduce separate facilities for different product, is another key regulatory limitation, adding a further layer of complexity. And it is also important to note a recent development regarding the state bank scheme. Just as the scheme was gaining traction, the state bank has now ceased allocations to banks under the facility due to an IMF conditionality, which restricts them from engaging in um, refinance facilities. So now many banks have already exhausted their quotas for renewable energy financing. This has resulted in the current cessation of financing for distributed solar PV under the facility. And yeah, if we can move to the next slide. Yeah, so in a nutshell, what we observe is that green lending options are available, but implementation and access issues persist. And overall, we observe significant gaps at the regulatory level. Voluntary regulations have posed a major constraint, while in the wake of all these challenges, no proper monitoring or evaluation mechanism for assessing the progress of these finance facility has been developed during this whole time frame, which has further undermined its legitimacy. And lastly, the scheme was discontinued at a time when it was gaining traction. And in parallel, we see another challenge, that is the bureaucratization and securitization of these loans. Banks are hesitant to leverage finance for green products owing to perceived risks and challenges. And those who have engaged in green lending, they have put in place difficult eligibility criterions, and the stringent terms and conditions of these loans restricts its eligibility scope for majority, undermining a balanced distributional gain from these facilities. So yeah, overall, this is what we see. And yeah, Rimsha, if you can move next slide. So now we will move to the conclusion and recommendations. And yeah, so our key findings uh, are that distributed solar PV and electric vehicle financing are still in its infancy. And uh, secondly, critical limitations within regulations of green lending uh, hinders broader renewable energy financing initiatives. And then bureaucratization and securitization of loan further undermines the equitable distribution of these green loans. Regarding the effectiveness of green lending, it is critical to boost an efficient, effective energy transition. Yeah, so these are the proposals for increasing the effectiveness of green lending facilities to boost effective energy transition. And so what we propose is to revisit the regulatory framework governing green financing to ensure a people-centered transition, which includes, so we propose strengthening the existing regulations through improved taxonomy, obligatory financing, and effective implementation of the rolled out regulations. Secondly, it is very important to bolster the confidence of the banks toward green lending because renewable energy financing is a relatively new market for many bankers, and there is a high concern among banks regarding the risks of defaults. So, the confidence of banks can be bolstered by establishing effective risk sharing mechanisms and by creating formal secondary markets for renewable energy product. And thirdly, as we said, that the bureaucratization and securitization of loans is undermining an equitable distribution. So it is very important that this challenge is also addressed. And finally, a rigorous monitoring and evaluation mechanism must complement the green lending regulations to ensure effective implementation. So by integrating monitoring and evaluation as integral components of regulatory framework, policymakers can enhance transparency, accountability, and effectiveness in driving the green lending agenda forward. So yeah, that's it. And yeah, here I will conclude. And now, if anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to answer.
So there is one question. So are these schemes for solar PV or a utility scale?
So basically, the State Bank Renewable Energy Financing Scheme, it extends loans under three different categories. So the category one, its scope covers utility scale projects, and the category two is like for small SMEs or prosumers, and the third category is then for vendors and companies who wants to install these systems on lease or rental basis.
So you can write your questions in the Q&A box. Um, so we'll uh, definitely will take your questions. Um, there is another questions regarding the status of these schemes. Uh, what are the current status of these EV and solar PV schemes in Pakistan?
Yeah, so as we presented in the slides, we actually you can, if you can recall from the presentation, that the electric vehicle subsidy model scheme has yet not been implemented, whereas the state bank scheme, it has so far it had partial introduction, and now finally state bank have ceased allocations under this financing facility.
So uh, there is another question regarding the financial model for off-grid. So what is, in your opinion, is a feasible model for off-grid areas like Balochistan? where people don't have access to finance. So this
So
question is, yeah.
this state bank renewable energy financing scheme, it covers uh, these projects whether they are on grid or off grid. So yeah, as
Mm,
I said that it provides loans under three different categories, and depending on who is investing and who wants to install these systems, they can then access loans under the relevant category.
mm. So there's another questions, and I would like any one of you to take up. So this is regarding banks. So what incentives can be given to banks when instability of current landscape, such as low demand and IMF limitations, so that are hindering these market dynamics for the long term? So what incentives can be given to banks to, extend these financing scheme?
Yeah, so first I will uh, take it, and then if Rimsha wants to add something. So as I said that right now a key concern of the bank is absence of risk sharing mechanism. If we look at the state bank renewable energy financing scheme, although as we highlighted that it is a very good scheme, but under that facility the state bank does not share any kind of risks with the commercial banks. So in this regard I think the relevant stakeholders needs to uh, take some initiatives to increase their confidence. And again, as we showed earlier, that absence of secondary markets for resale value of these products is another key constraint. So how can we efficiently take some initiatives for building these formal secondary markets, which can then increase it can decrease the concerns of the banks with regard to financial risks. And if we talk about low demand, so yeah, in Pakistan, about these financing facilities, people do not have a lot of information. So if these regulations are rolled out, I think it is very important that they are also advertised so that people know about these facilities. And yeah, Rimsha, if you would like to add something to it.
Yeah, so I would just like to add another perspective to this, since we will also be posting a policy brief or a situation brief on our website that will include all the details. But in our study, we also saw case studies from our peer regional countries. So one method that we can use to incentivize banks is through a use of ratings. So in Bangladesh, they have a system of camel ratings in which banks are basically ranked on different order based on their engagement in climate change mitigation or towards green finance. So if we can use that sort of incentive, the government can adopt such a ranking system, and that ranking system will actually enable these banks to have to ease up their further licenses or new investments to from the state banks. So this is another method that we can use to incentivize banks to engage more in the green lending facilities. And there's also an option of involving an intermediary in between that could share the risk, as Naila mentioned. So this intermediary, for example, in Bangladesh, we saw the non-banking finance institute of ID Call. So that's what it actually provides different sort of guarantees, and not just financial guarantees, but also in form of you can say social collateral. So not just financial, but social collateral. That also is a way in which banks can feel more confident in providing lending to green projects. That's from my side. Thank you.
So this gentleman asked a question about these microgrids. So in your opinion, like parallel to rural, solar PVs and EVs, uh, so what do you think is the feasible model for microgrids for rural areas and the recovery mechanism? So if you could answer.
Manzoor, I did not follow the question exactly. Is it about the feasibility of microgrids, or is
No,
it
it's
about the?
they're asking about the financial model for microgrids. So the uptake of microgrids in rural areas. So should we like uh, is there should be the gentleman asking about if these microgrids should also be incorporated in the existing schemes to to extend the scope of financing scheme. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it is very important that for off-grid solutions, we do have certain financing facility, because right now we have the investors are not interested to invest in these areas, so it can incentivize and bring in investors for it. And as I mentioned, that the scope of the state bank scheme did cover these projects too. But right now, as we shown later in the slides, that right now what is happening is that state bank has stopped the allocations under the finance facility. So yeah, maybe if in the panel discussion we can ask the relevant stakeholders that what do they have now in the pipeline as a future mechanism to address these financing gaps.
Right. So we are running short on time, so I'll just move to the second session, and we'll take questions at the end as well, and you can also write your questions, and we'll definitely respond. So now let us move towards the second session. In this session, we would like to build further on our discussion regarding green lending and supportive policies for scaling up REs and EVs. So joining us for this session will be our panelists. So let me briefly introduce our panelists first. We are joined by Naveen Ahmed. She's currently serving as an advisor and transaction coordinator with PFAN UNIDO. She focuses on supporting early stage businesses that mitigate climate change and provide clean energy solutions. Next, we have Zan Molvi. Zan is a research director at Alternative Law Collective and an expert on global climate finance. So, a little bit about ALC. So, it's a think tank in Pakistan which comprises of lawyers and academics who conducts research and advocacy around social, economic, and environmental justice. So we are also joined by Syed Raza Mohsin. He's the CEO of Electra, a leading two-wheeler EV manufacturer in Pakistan. It's an electric bike startup based in Karachi, focuses on producing EVs for Pakistani markets. Um, Next, we have Mohammad Sajjad, who is the Senior Assistant Director at National Energy Conservation, Efficiency and Conservation Authority. So NECA is a government agency whose primary role is to develop and implement strategies, policies around energy efficiency, reducing energy consumption, and conserving natural resource. Finally, we have Naila Saleh from Agora. So, firstly, many thanks for joining us for today's discussion and taking out time for our event. So, I would like to pose first question to Naveen. So, as highlighted in the study presentation, presently there is an absence of secondary markets and absence of risk-sharing mechanisms, uh, undermining the confidence and interest of banks to, engage in green lending. So how do you look at this challenge? And additionally, how do you envision effectively tackling this challenge? So over to you, Naveen.
Thank you so much, Manzoor. So your question is very interesting, but I want to put this in the context of the lending landscape in Pakistan. And a major chunk of our banking sector loans are essentially borrowings by the government of Pakistan or other state-owned enterprises. So this lending proposition is essentially risk-free, and the spreads are very attractive. And this arrangement is working so well for the banks that the industry has posted their highest ever profits. And I mean, most banks in the industry have posted highest ever profits this year. So, given this background, you can see that there's very little motivation for financial institutions to actually lend to new businesses or middle market clients or otherwise underbanked segments. So I mentioned this because this dynamic is kind of independent of the sector. Really, it's not a question of more or less desirable sectors for banks. It's more like what kind of sponsors do they want to work with and what kind of collateral are they expecting to receive from the sponsors. So banks are essentially looking for sectors where they can actually lend to new businesses or otherwise underbanked segments.
So I think Naveen is
Not
dropped.
audible at the
Family,
Yeah.
moment.
pedigree businesses and all. So, and in terms of collateral, so project companies are expected to provide collateral in the form of tangible assets such as real estate or liquid assets such as deposits, TDRs, bonds, etc. So now coming to renewable energy projects, we've seen utility scale deployments, and they've happened in wind, they've happened in solar, they've happened in hydel as well, very successfully. And in these projects, the government has been the off-taker, and there has been no market risk as such for the project itself. And the tariff is also, it allows for capacity payments, so the lenders are covered for any interest rate fluctuations and, shortfall in revenues generally. So as long as the banks are comfortable with the sponsors of these projects, they can fund these projects on a limited or non-recourse structure as well. Now, the distributed generation side of things, that's where the off-taker is the private sector participant, and that's where things get a little tricky. So the solar PV market in Pakistan, in terms of consumer adoption, it's a fairly mature. Everyone is comfortable with the technology. People understand the economic argument in terms of cost savings, and the product market fit, it is established. And the solar EPC companies also, the service providers in this equation, they've built a track record over the past decade or so. And we see all kinds of deployments. So industrial deployments, commercial deployments, residential, off-grid, on-grid, agri-sector deployments, irrigation solutions, all kinds. And there are two levels at which this sector can tap into funding. So you can lend to solar businesses who will do the capex themselves and then provide a pay-as-you-go kind of solution to commercial or residential clients, or you can go directly to the consumer and finance them. So here again, the limitation is not so much as the commercial viability of the RE projects, because as we've discussed, it's fairly simple and the technology is mature. People understand the economic argument, really. The reluctance is simply on part of the Pakistani banks to lend to anyone who's not either a tier A corporate or a high net worth individual, and to a group or an individual who cannot provide tangible or liquid collateral. So that's where our constraint is. And to address this gap, there have been several credit risk guarantee mechanisms that were introduced. So USAID was part of some, GrantCo has some credit enhancement facilities, and then InfraZamin also has a credit enhancement product. So these products have made financings possible for smaller deployments, especially under the PPA model. And but there is again a constraint here in the sense that the most successful financing or structures are where the guarantees are on a first loss, first demand basis. So unfortunately, utilization where there is a partial risk cover, and a lot of state bank schemes also come with partial risk cover. So there's no 100% risk coverage anywhere. So utilization under those schemes, that's suboptimal because commercial banks aren't willing to underwrite even the partial risk, the remaining credit risk of these under these financings. So that's, in terms of a recommendation, if I may make a policy recommendation, I would say that at least at this stage in the market, you should, credit enhancement should be first loss instruments rather than partial risk guarantees, until the financing market is more mature, so to speak. And the situation can move marginally if there was an active secondary market for the solar panels like we have for cars and homes, really. And that would provide comfort to the banks. They would be able to liquidate the collateral easily in the event of default. So this market, again, needs to be transparent, and there needs to be a grading system so that for the equipment, inverters, panels, whatever, so that it's readily tradable and easily liquidatable. So and then there's a demand side argument for the low credit offtake as well, and that's the cost of borrowing. So our policy rate is 22%, 3-month KIBOR is 21.5%, and you add credit spread to this, so that takes you to 24, 25%, and then the consumer financing rates are far higher. So 24, 25 is what corporates get. So there aren't simply that many businesses and individuals in any sector really of the economy that can sustain this kind of a cost of borrowing. And they can do it perhaps temporarily, but not sustain it over a 3 to 5 year period. So this is why we have such low interest from businesses to borrow currently and to finance such solar or RE deployments. The SBPRE scheme that you mentioned, because of its concessional nature, it had significant uptake. Unfortunately, it was deployed by banks to help the largest blue chip businesses who already had financing options available to them. So each bank, as you know, has a discretionary high bar kind of criteria for lending under these schemes. And that criteria and we do have an EV player here as well on the panel. So the product market fit is not established in the sense that this sector has early stage companies. Most of these companies have been bootstrapped or funded through pre-seed money. And these companies do not have sufficient cash flows to support debt payments, not in the initial years of operations. So this is essentially an equity play, and commercial banks are, so far away from where we need to be to finance these businesses. Again, and on the consumer side, if you look at Pakistan as a low-income country, our market is very value-driven. People use their cars and bikes for a very long time. 10 years or more on average. So they want to buy from manufacturers who would be around for the next 10, 15, 20 years. So I think establishing brand credibility is critical for the new entrants in this space, because if a consumer is buying a durable, then they need to see that the counterparty that they're buying from is also going to be around for that long, for the life of the product. Plus, at the current stage of technology, so if you look at the affordable or the low-end EV products, they don't necessarily provide the same performance that ICE vehicles provide at the same price point. So at a higher price point, yes, you could perhaps match the specs, but at lower price points, you can't do that. And even in terms of life cycle costs, so for two and three wheelers, the life cycle costs for lower end EVs, yes, the users can achieve fuel savings, but for four wheelers, the economic argument isn't just there. It's less convincing. So with that perspective, I feel that the logistics fleets are the first segments where we can see adoption, because they put a lot of miles on their vehicles, and the economics are simply more favorable for them compared to the retail segment. In terms of policy guidance, just to accelerate the product adoption, I would suggest standardization in the industry, so that standardization in terms of battery, in terms of swapping, in terms of baseline specs, so that capital is more utilized more efficiently in the industry. And perhaps there should be tax incentives for indigenization of components, so that the supply chain uncertainty is removed. Because if you look at conventional vehicles, we have a very vibrant downstream market. You have auto parts vendors, you have service technicians. So anything breaks down, you know that in a couple of hours, you can get your car or your motorbike on the road again. With EVs, a lot of our industry is still import dependent. So until we have this downstream vendor industry, it's very difficult to ensure that there will be an after or a secondary market, because secondary market requires a certain degree of consumer confidence, and that consumer confidence is built over time. So once that happens, once you have the supply chain indigenized, I believe a lot of the 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 secondary market will just come up spontaneously, is what I'm saying. So I hope I've answered your question.
Yeah, very much. So just a reminder, so if you have any questions from our panelists, you can please do write them in the chat box or email to us. So thank you, Naveen. for that insight on solar and EV market domain, and especially highlighting the need for de-risking to, scale up the EV adoption. So now, Naila, based on the presentation, you highlighted the need for equitable distribution of green loans and the need for balanced energy transition. Can you elaborate on this further and share your thoughts on how we could do that?
Yeah, I think here the central bank has taken some genuinely good interventions by introducing a concessional facility, right, which was supposed to increase the accessibility and affordability for everyone. However, as we delve deeper, we encounter challenges in the implementation of these regulations. For instance, the legitimacy of the financing scheme has been pretty weak owing to the voluntary regulations. Then our interviews with the banks indicated that most consider green lending as conflicting with their interests, and so their lending approach continues to be embedded in the profit maximization logics. And so the current landscape is characterized by the intricacies of loan securitization and unfavorable conditions, which are leading to significant barriers in accessing these resources. So although the subsidized scheme have commendably lowered the interest rate and increased the um, affordability for majority, but the reality beneath surface tells a different story, where a substantial portion of our population remains excluded from these financing opportunities because of the securitization of these loans by banks, which is perpetuating a cycle of inequity. So we need regulations. We need the regulator to actually take responsibility here and ensure effective implementation, because this lack of oversight as well as absence of proper sanctions or penalties for banks who are slow to embrace the regulations or have switched to securitization of these loans is a crucial impediment right now. And fundamentally, with weak regulations, the apprehensions and the interests of the banks dominates, which then diverges and conflicts with those of the potential borrowers. So this systematic misalignment leads to weak institutionalization of the prevailing schemes and supportive policies. So yes, the renewable energy scale up, I think, has yet to break through um, an array of barriers. I would really hope to see a well-structured regulatory framework which focuses more on easing the securitization of these loans, and the accessibility and affordability of these loans should be enhanced for everyone. This is not about embracing sustainable technologies. It's about ensuring that every individual has a fair chance to contribute to a greener and more prosperous future.
So, regulators should not restrict their roles to merely financing or introducing financing facilities. They should also regulate the operating environment and for effective implementation. So, now I would like to turn to Zain and ask similar questions regarding public and private lending. So, these public and private lending alone is not sufficient to meet our energy transition commitments. So, how do you look at the role of IFIs in leveraging finance for ORI scale up and when it comes to global south? And what do you see, and why do you see a very limited involvement on behalf of IFIs in Pakistan?
Yeah, I mean, well, for starters, it's not limited. It's limited in the wrong things and perhaps oversized in the wrong things, right? So that's for starters. But I want to zone out a bit and take a macroscopic bird's eye view of the situation, and I'm slightly pessimistic about this. So my own expertise is in the global side of the equation. I think when you look at that, it puts a lot of this into context. So you can try to manage, micromanage, expand the scope, expand incentivization, try and bring in as many capital, expanding capital measures for expanding capital within the lending circuits commercially. I don't think that's where the real challenge lies, because the scale and scope is just too big when it comes to the question of decarbonization and RE, and all of these topics are built into that. And whether we're talking utility scale or we're talking distributed gen, just rooftops or EVs, they all come under that broader ambit. So let's take a look at what the scope is. According to the World Bank, our total needs for climate resilience in the next 6 years is $348 billion. That's 10.8% of Pakistan's GDP according to last year's estimates. This is higher than any other country in the world. Right? We have to recognize this. Vietnam, Cameroon each score lower, and those are some of the some of the more stressed countries when it comes to this issue. Um, and forget the fact that right now we're not even accounting for the amount of GDP we're going to lose in terms of water shortages and agricultural problems and air pollution and so on. Look on the other side of the equation, which is our total debt burdens, right? So this is basically doubled in the last 6 years. Right now, our debt servicing accounts for 85% of our total revenues, right? The amount that we're going to get this year. So that's just to give you, again, some context in terms of the broad bird's eye view. Now, decarbonization alone, and this covers all the things that we've been talking about, it's about 200 billion in the next 6 years, right? This is USD again. Now we're not right now we're not even talking about infrastructure gaps. So for example, forget the fact that EVs you can bring the loans up. Even if you were able to get and match your 30% EV target that you have in your policy, your NEV policy, your infrastructure gap alone is going to cost you up to 1 trillion per year, right, in capital investments. And if you don't make reforms, the World Bank guesses that it's going to be more like 8%. So just put that all together, and what you're looking at is a situation in which mobilizing private markets locally is not going to cut it, no matter which way you look at it. You're going to have to get capital sourced from ways and mechanisms that come from outside. Now, to underscore the challenge further, and just to sort of throw the debate back to folks, I want to see some interaction on this. If you want to talk about the private sphere, globally in first world nations, the rate of private climate finance growth is 4.8, whereas in public sector it's 8.9. Like, oh, in fact, sorry, 9.8%. That's more than double, right? Or roughly around double, which tells you something pretty simple. It tells you that if you want to navigate these markets and you want to incentivize them, it'll have to come through public support. That's what the first world is doing. Does Pakistan have that amount of money in its coffers? It simply doesn't. So we can keep playing, we can play musical chairs with this and pick money off from here and try and incentivize that and make little regulatory changes. They're not going to make an iota of difference. It's going to be a drop in the ocean. That's observation number one. I want to go to observation number two, which is, okay, what do we do, right? And what does the global scenario give us by way of some kind of suggestion? So the global north has been lots of things, right? So it's not just the commercial banks. They've been looking to activate capital markets overall. Pension funds are big, asset management companies. So basically non-banking finance corporations is what they're looking at. And that's been the big trend. It's really worked. I'm not sure it's going to work for Pakistan, but one thing that Pakistan does have going for it is that within its profile, in terms of its climate risk profile, you're basically looking at a situation where the IFIs, or even bilaterally, you are now eligible for a lot more than you previously were. For example, the RST, which is the IMF's new arm that they've come up with, is the Reliance and Sustainability Trust. It's dedicated specifically to climate, climate vulnerable nations like Pakistan. And those can give you mechanisms by which they can provide risk coverage, by which they can provide you public support for, let's say, not exactly utility scale, but distributed generation. So not rooftop, not utility scale, something in between, which your regulations do allow for, although they need change on the NEPRA front, that is. And they also give you the capacity, if you want to target them right, for now, not concessional, but non-debt creating funds. They also have rapid finance facility funds. Pakistan needs to look towards this. I think this is what our research needs to be geared towards. We need to start saying, look, these are the problems. It's not going to happen at the local level. Private finance is not good enough. You need to give us mechanisms on the public finance front from the global front, right? To give you a very small example before I close off on this discussion, just going back to the previous example, even though it's true that you do have public fund for utility scale and there's a lot more, uptake and market interest in that, the Muzaffargarh case on the solar PV for the competitive bidding auction mechanism showed us that this is not true. In fact, what it showed us was that private capital can hold you hostage. And when you put in the past, you put in all the experiences of the 90s, you're basically the IPPs and all that we owe them today. It's about 2.8 trillion that we owe just in capacity payments because of the dollar indexation crisis, right? That's exactly what they've been asking for, and that's what they've asked for in the KE cases, which is the Karachi Electric cases, where they've moved to solar as well, which tells you that private markets can hold you hostage. Commercial banks are probably not viable in terms of your overall global and sort of macro-ended picture. And the last thing I think it tells us, which is what I want to leave you all with as a thought to perhaps take the debate forward, is that unless we push for debt cancellation on the global front, unless we push for restructuring of our debt service burdens on the IFI fronts, unless we push for public support along those lines, and we start taking the question of EVs and rooftop solar and distributed gen as part of the bigger piece of the puzzle of climate finance, which includes climate justice finance, loss and damage and adaptation and some mechanism of synergizing the two, we're not going to get ahead of the climate finance problem, which is really what this is a subset of. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Zen. So thank you for highlighting the contemporary challenges. So we do have like time constraints. So I would say participants can uh, put your questions via email, and then we'll definitely respond. Now I'll turn to Raza as someone who is directly involved in the business side of EVs. And my question to you is, how do we potentially tap the two-wheeler and three-wheeler market in the country? And additionally, what is your perspective on concessionary financing and supportive policies used by some of our peer regional countries to scale up EVs? And what lessons could we learn from that? So over to you, Raza.
Thank you, Manzoor, and thank you everyone else. It's been very insightful, and I'm actually shocked at the level of depth the participants have on the subject. I think for starters, we have to understand what's at stake. What does this EV transition or this green transition means to us today and 10 years from now? And we have to imagine the world in 2040, like how the world is going to be in 2040. Basically, the entire world is going to have free energy and free transportation by virtue of free energy. And where are we going to stand 15 years from now? How are we going to stay competitive? We missed the last transition of energy, and that's where we're in the state we are today. And as a active participant in the EV two-wheeler segment, it's very clear that the EV revolution is not going to come in Pakistan through Audi e-trons and Porsche Taycans. 70% of the Pakistani population uses two-wheelers as a mode of transportation. So it has to come through two-wheelers. And uh, so number one, there is a transition which is happening globally. If we don't participate, we're gonna be left behind. Look at targets of our peer countries like India in the region, in Southeast Asia, or in the West, or anywhere else in the world, even in Africa. Everybody is going to get to significantly high percentage of transition by 2030 and complete transition in some cases by 2040. We have an extremely ambitious number at 30% by 2030. Uh, I mean, we were supposed to talk about green financing, and the first thing that came to my mind is I'm going to be talking about something which doesn't exist in Pakistan. As someone who's actually pursued trying to get green financing for my customers, it has been near impossible. I saw that the number of banks participating in these propositions is 4%. I wonder what the disbursement number is. I wouldn't be surprised if it's zero. It's virtually non-existent. And what's happened, and I think solar was a very good success study, but we also have to look at, like Naveen pointed out correctly, that they went to blue chip customers to begin with. One of the proposition banks have when you're installing solar is that they're asking for collateral, which is your property, and that already alienates about 50% of the market. Two-wheelers, we're looking at ordinary Pakistanis which are making somewhere around $200 to $500 a month. So owning land is already a prerequisite. They're mostly mortgage. Number one. Number two, we know one of the reasons why Pakistan is lagging in economic progress is because female participation in the country is as low as 20%, which is one of the lowest rates in the world. And there was a third-party research done in 2020, that one of the biggest reasons women don't go out and work is because of commute. EV two-wheelers are automatic and they're easy to ride, and we've seen huge kind of women come to us and they really want to ride on motorcycles. They find it easier to ride, but again, they don't have the financial numbers. Like even it's easier for men to have those kind of credentials and go to a bank and apply for such loans. Women with no financial background who are just starting out, they have nothing. So you're already alienating like 50% of your population to go from point one to point B without being harassed. Uh, and the third thing is, and it's so far it sounds like drawing room conversation, but climate is becoming real. Like we used to have those floods every decade, and they've become like once in 2 years phenomenon, and hopefully, I hope it doesn't get worse, but from what I read, it's not going to get any better. So and also there when we are talking about Pakistani economic crisis, if you look at the past 70 years, every crisis has emanated from an FX. It's been an FX crisis. It's been a foreign currency crisis, and we end up importing more than we export. Everybody knows the largest import of Pakistan is oil. Everybody knows that. I'm not sure everybody knows what if you segmentize oil. The single largest import of Pakistan is motorcycle petrol at $8 billion a year and $1 billion a year for motorcycle lubricant. We're importing $9 billion of energy just for people to move from point A to point B. EVs can change that. EVs can help you take out about 20% or 15%, I'm not sure, of your imports. That's almost creating doubling your textile exports, just by virtue of transitioning to another technology. So it has a multi-pronged solution for a lot of problems, uh, but like I said, banks, and it's been said earlier too, that banks have they have no incentive to do that. The entire banking sector profitability this year is going to be 600 billion rupees. The entire EV motorcycle segment is 3 billion rupees. So even if everybody takes a loan out and defaults, is going to change their profit by a massive 0.5%. That's the entire sector is going to make. The NPLs in India on consumer finance lending is 20%. The last time I checked, in Pakistan, it's less than 1%. So we all talk about taking financial risk. And I'm sorry if any bankers there, I don't mean to offend anyone. But, you're in the business of taking financial risk, but apparently that's not the case here. But so I think this is something which has to be mandated by the central bank, and it's been done across the globe. It's not something unusual. There has been reasons where where central banks have come in and told financial institutions to go in a certain manner to support a certain industry. Um, my customers who are getting, and there was also there were also concerns about demand not being there. Uh, we have relationships with three commercial banks, and they're Naveen also mentioned about K plus three. They were offering K plus double digits, and we are still making economic sense at those rates as well. Like monthly installments are still lower than monthly fuel, whatever you're going to spend on petrol. And we just put a post on our social media, which is very vibrant. We put a post on our social media that, okay, this bank is giving so much in installments. We received 4,500 applications in 5 days. We had to stop the ad because we knew we couldn't process that much, so many applications. It's been 2 months. Not even a single application has been approved. I don't know what's happened. Whether it's the benchmark, whether it's the bureaucracy, I don't know what happened. We stopped the app because we were like, okay, this is just beyond us, just to process those. So there is demand. There is demand, but I just feel that you go back, that they don't want to lend it to consumers. They want to stay safe. Give it to blue chips, or lend it back to the government at K plus two or whatever. So I really feel that someone has to wave the stake. The crowding out is taken out most of the sectors in this country. We are in infancy. Now I'm going to give it a little positive spin as well. I don't want to depress everyone. Uh, Pakistan is in infancy in electric two-wheelers. The Tesla has glamorized the four-wheeler segment, and then the Europeans have jumped in, and the Japanese have jumped in. But what's good for us is that the entire world in the electric two-wheeler segment is in infancy segment. So we're not that far behind. Maybe we're 2 years behind everybody else. Uh, if and I'll tell you, there is a multilateral agency in Pakistan. It's a multilateral agency, and we have talked to them. And there is a Vietnamese chap and an Indian chap on the other side. They were experts in EV, and we were talking about some potential financing thing. And they asked me about how much does it cost for me to make my motorcycles. And as also mentioned earlier, that my motorcycles have global standards. Like we're using lithium-ion batteries, so we have the potential to tap international markets. And they told us that we are making the cheapest motorcycles in the world. I didn't know that, and that just light a bulb in my hand that we can maybe even export these motorcycles abroad. So there's also, if you like, Zen was mentioning financing. If you support this industry right now at its infancy before everybody takes off, you can actually support it through financing it via exports. Pakistan is very cheap, trained labor. They don't have degrees to show for it, but by virtue of having a very mature 70-year-old motorcycle industry, we are extremely trained, extremely blue and white collar labor. The rents are very low. We are very competitive too. We've done R&D work of, I'm not going to mention, but we've done a lot of R&D on our products, all local resources, and we've managed to make a excellent product. So if we can be supported right now, we have a product. Pakistan itself is a $10 billion market. It's going to become a $10 billion if the 30% by 2030 is achieved. EV two-wheelers is going to be a $10 billion a year market. The global market is going to be $3 trillion a year market. It's not a small market. And this is probably the only time in the past 50 or 30 years, just to be,
sorry to interrupt. We are running
yeah,
short on time. So if you
yeah.
could
I'm just going to
just summarize.
wrap it up. So I was going to say that the Western market, the demand for for motorcycle in Western markets was going up on the back of the last mile phenomenon which has taken place. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
potential, but everything looks hunky dory on PowerPoint, but there is nothing on ground.
So, thank you. So yeah, the problem still persists in the EV domain. So for government perspective, so we do have a representative from a government organization, Mohammed Sajjad Saab from NICA. So my question to Mohammed Sajjad Saab. So what is like NICA is doing within these context of green finance to scale up the transition, and also what policies or plans are in the pipeline to scale up these products? So, Sajjad Saab.
Thank you, Manzoor and team, and all the participants. As I was listening to the panelists, I
If you
think,
could switch on your camera.
okay. So, as everyone is talking about the EV's challenges and solar, so I think we should not lose the hope. And I will let you know about a few policy measures that government has taken regarding the EVs and solars. Basically, uh, as far as EVs is concerned, as Raza was discussing about the two-wheelers, I just want to mention before I will discuss about the policy landscape. Government is very keen about the transition of two-wheelers and three-wheeler to EVs because recently government of Pakistan has moved a summary regarding the transition towards the electric bikes and etc. That is true that more than 50% of our imported petrol is going to bikes. But overall, what the scope is about the policy measures is that we are not disappointed regarding the policy initiative or the government stance regarding the EV bikes or EV rickshaws. Because PICA, Pakistan, Punjab Energy Efficiency and Conservation Agency, and NICA have moved different proposal to the government, State Bank of Pakistan, as well as to the international donor agencies. I would like to mention that recently we have been planning for the fan replacement program in Pakistan. Basically, because summer is about to happen and we will be facing with the peak loads in summer. So just to mention how things are going around the market, or how the government is thinking about these initiatives. Basically, we have summer peak loads reached to 30,000 megawatt last year. Okay, and the wind and the cooling load was about 17,000 megawatt. out of which about 8,000 megawatt was due to the fans. So government has called all the relevant stakeholders to come and sit together. And before the elections, the previous government has taken this initiative to launch the fan replacement program. Hopefully, as the government is going to take the oath and new government is coming, we are expecting that this program will be launched soon. That about only the fan replacement program can offer 60,000 mega of watt of electricity reduction in summer coal management. But overall, as the panelist, as the study is concerned that PRIED team has conducted, I would like to mention that solar PV has issues of sustainability, standardization, and indigenization. That's why I think banks are reluctant to finance. Even the state bank is not issuing clear policy direction. What we have learned in last few months, few years. And NICA has initiated several initiatives regarding the green financing with World Bank, GIZ, and other donor agencies to initiate at least at the demand side energy management or energy efficiency perspective. But overall, this is not only the demand side issue; it is as well as the generation side issue. If we look at to look at our energy profile, we can see that we are still depending on oil and gas, and oil is totally imported oil. That's why there is an issue at generation side. So government policy is very clear that we are going towards the off-grid PV generation of and solarization of public buildings. As far as solarization of public building is concerned, I would like to mention here that the government of Pakistan has mandated NICA to develop energy conservation building codes that are also available at NICA website if anyone is interested to review or study. And there is a clear chapter on solarization of public buildings. But what we are looking at, what we think about these the solarization of public buildings, first we need to develop energy audit system of the buildings. As far as public sector buildings are concerned, NICA is very clear about this, and government of Pakistan has given clear direction that first we should have to conduct energy audit of these buildings. Proper insulation should be there, and then we can establish or we can plant solarization of these buildings, because we think the energy demand of the public building automatically will be come down, because as far as the retrofitting and retrofitting as well as energy audit is concerned, we have experienced that in Islamabad we have conducted audit of 10 iconic building, which come into overall that 50 to 60% energy consumption of the building can be reduced through retrofitting and through the use of proper energy efficient appliances. So that we are clear that we should have to focus on the standardization of the products, especially electric appliances, as well as the appliance equipment used for the solarization, solar plates, solar batteries, etc. So NICA is very focused about the standardization of energy products, especially used for the solarization as well as for other
Just,
appliances.
so yes, sir, we are running short on time. If you could just
Just
like
I'm
summarize.
concluding. Just I am concluding. So, just what I am talking about is that we should not lose the hope. Government of Pakistan has taken certain initiative regarding the EVs, especially Raza Saab, for you. We have developed EV charging infrastructure regulations that are hopefully will be in front of cabinet within few weeks. And then also we are working on fuel economy standards for Pakistan that have never been developed in Pakistan. So as far as the electricity policy is concerned, NICA has been mandated for the standardization of EV charging infrastructure, and NICA is very much on it. And these regulations are also available at NICA website for your if you are interested to give your inputs or feedback. Secondly, as far as solar PV is concerned, NICA has been very keen to introduce solarization of public buildings as well as standardization of the solar product, especially the solar equipment used, battery swapping mechanism, all these. We are concerned about the standardization, and that is our mandate. And the rest, I think, PRIED, in future reference, PRIED should consider Alternate Energy Development Board or PPIB, who are for mandated for the renewable energy in Pakistan. Especially they have launched one window operations for the renewables, and also they are working with DFIs for the generation of renewable energy in Pakistan. So
Thank,
as far as from
thank,
my side, I
thank,
would like to thank PRIDE and all the team from Germany
thank
and
you.
the panelists for having me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Uh, Thank you, Siyasat. Very insightful. So, unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I would like to thank all our panelists once again for their valuable insights and expertise. So, I'll just briefly recap some of the discussion points. One is the secondary markets and risk sharing mechanism are crucial for wider market inclusion. Policy interventions are needed in the EV sector to standardize products, incentives, local component productions, and de-risk financing. Regulator has an important role to ensure that banks do participate in green lending. Uh, Government, businesses, and stakeholders must collaborate to accelerate the transition to sustainable transportation. And finally, the potential for climate policy analytics, risk sharing initiatives, and non-debt creating by IFIs is a possible method for enhancing the pool for available funds for climate adaptation, climate mitigation. So thank you all for joining us